Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. Without objection, the chair may declare the committee in recess at any point. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the United States Coast Guard's role in securing the homeland. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Maritime trade is the engine of global commerce. A robust military presence on the high seas is essential to deter piracy and adversarial states, ensuring this engine that runs smoothly. The 17th century English explorer Sir Walter Raleigh once wrote, "Whoever commands the sea commands the trade. Whoever commands the trade of the world commands the riches of the world, and consequently, the world itself." Control of the high seas has empowered nations throughout history, from Phoenicia and Athens to the Dutch Republic and the British Empire. This is true today just as much as it was thousands of years ago. Yet the threat landscape facing our country grows increasingly complex with every passing year. Cartels and smugglers exploit blind spots along our massive maritime border to traffic people and narcotics into our country. People's Republic of China, the Russian Federation, and other geopolitical adversaries contest our laws and international norms through gray zone actions at sea. Nation states and non-nation actors increasingly utilize cyberspace to attack, disrupt, and degrade our port infrastructure and the maritime transportation system that our economy depends on. That is why the United States must prioritize its ability to enforce laws, hold bad actors accountable, and protect life at sea. During my time at West Point, it's taught the importance of tailoring strategy to appropriately address the specific characteristics of each situation. Therefore, the United States Coast Guard is unique in its role in protecting our homeland and upholding our national sovereignty. With its 11 statutory missions, the Coast Guard is a multifaceted actor that can conduct law enforcement missions, support the intelligence community, and build and maintain international partnerships. From the Gulf of Mexico to the Straits of Florida, from the Persian Gulf to the Bering Strait, and from the Western Pacific to the Eastern Seaboard, Coast Guard personnel operate surface, air, and unmanned assets performing critical national security missions. The Coast Guard performs exceptionally well in the most challenging environments on Earth, and the demands for Coast Guard services at home and abroad is only increasing. Unfortunately, the Coast Guard has critical manpower and asset needs in order to meet this growing demand. In the Caribbean, the Coast Guard is under severe pressure to interdict the massive waves of illegal immigrants, leaving scant resources for counter-narcotics missions. This allows cartel activity to go unchecked. In its partnership building work with Pacific nations, the Coast Guard does not have enough people to maintain a consistent presence in areas where the PRC is poised to seize the initiative and impose its will upon smaller states that lack the means and governance structures to push back. Like most of the military, the Coast Guard is struggling to recruit enough personnel to fulfill its complex missions. Last year, the Coast Guard told Congress that they had missed their recruiting goals for the previous 4 years. And earlier this year, Coast Guard officials stated that they were short nearly 2,500 people. Ensuring that more high-quality individuals enlist and commission in the Coast Guard will provide the service with the personnel necessary to carry out its broad missions at home and across the globe. Coast Guard is also in the process of replacing some of its aging surface and air assets, some of which have been in service since World War II. Of particular importance is the Polar Security Cutter, or PSC program, which will deliver 3 new heavy polar icebreakers to replace the Coast Guard's lone operational heavy icebreaker, which was commissioned nearly 50 years ago. With Russia and the PRC challenging U.S. sovereignty in the Arctic and Antarctic, the United States must maintain a credible, persistent presence in the polar regions. During the past year and a half, our committee has heard from several Coast Guard officials about the multitude of threats, the unique capabilities the Coast Guard has to respond to these threats, and the pressing needs of the service to ensure that they have the capacity to do so. Thinking about the service's current situation, I am especially concerned about the systemic issues that threaten to undermine the Coast Guard's ability to fulfill its statutory mission requirements and protect the homeland. The Coast Guard has experienced major problems in administering its acquisition programs. For instance, the PSC program was initially supposed to have delivered the first cutter by this year, yet construction of the first ship has not even begun. Additionally, according to a Congressional Budget Office cost estimate that Transportation and Maritime Security Subcommittee that I chair, and was requested by the chair of the committee, the PSC program's costs will be almost 60% higher than the Coast Guard's current estimate. These shortcomings ultimately hinder the Coast Guard's ability to maintain a sufficient presence in critical mission areas. Regarding personnel, the Coast Guard has severely damaged its standing with its handling of Operation Filed Anchor and the wider issue of sexual assault, sexual harassment, and retaliation within the service's ranks. While I appreciate the ongoing efforts to address the issues, the Coast Guard must earn back the trust of its service members and the American public. It's long past time for more accountability and an overhaul of the Coast Guard's service culture. In closing, the Coast Guard ensures that the United States can meet any maritime threat, from criminal activity to nation-state aggression, with appropriate and decisive force. To reiterate Sir Walter's words, control of the high seas enables our nation's prosperity and security. We must prioritize the mission of the Coast Guard. Our homeland security depends on it. I thank our witnesses, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Fagan, for appearing before the committee today, and I look forward to her testimony. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witness, Admiral Fagan. Let me say that the flowers here represent a tragic loss for this committee. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Houston, Texas. As people have said yesterday and continue to say, she's a fierce advocate, was a fierce advocate for her community, and she will be missed not just by constituents, but also by this committee. Again, welcome, Admiral Fagan. We're glad to have you. We're here today at a critical time for the Coast Guard. To ensure the safety, security, and stewardship of our nation's waters, the Coast Guard is charged with carrying out a wide range of important missions. Its activities include everything from disrupting transnational crime in the Caribbean to search and rescue efforts off our shores to addressing the impact of human activity in the polar regions as ice caps recede. Successfully achieving all that the Coast Guard is called upon to do has never been so complex. The threat of global adversaries, the impact of climate change, and an increase in illegal fishing pose significant challenges to the Coast Guard's mission. The Coast Guard must have a workforce and fleet of unparalleled strength and readiness to meet this moment. Yet, we've learned that in the past, the Coast Guard has not always treated its workforce with respect, fairness, and transparency that it deserves. In fact, the service has actively covered up assaults and discrimination. Through the Operation Filed Anchor investigation, we learned that the Coast Guard improperly handled dozens of allegations of sexual assault at the Coast Guard Academy over the course of 2 decades. The Coast Guard allowed individuals accused of rape and other sexual assaults to avoid criminal investigation. Administrative punishments, if they happen at all, were as minor as extra work or lowered class standing. As a result, some of the accused ascended to top roles within the Coast Guard and other branches of the military. The Coast Guard inaction led to many victims leaving the academy after reporting their assaults, ending their hopes of a career in the service. The Coast Guard failed to protect its own people, and the damage caused is truly incalculable. My heart goes out to every survivor who the Coast Guard failed to protect, and my gratitude goes to those who have bravely shared those stories with investigators, reporters, members of Congress, and the public. The Coast Guard compounded the deep betrayal of its service members' trust by failing to fully and transparently disclose the results of its investigation to Congress, the public, or even the victims involved. I'm particularly disturbed that the Coast Guard withheld information on Operation Filed Anchor from this committee, given our concurrent investigation under my chairmanship into harassment, bullying, retaliation, and mismanaged investigation at the Coast Guard Academy. That investigation, which I led with my late colleague, Oversight Committee Chairman Elijah Cummins, included voluminous document requests, transcribed interviews with multiple Coast Guard senior leaders, and a joint committee hearing. In addition, former Commandant Carl Schultz testified before this committee at a hearing in 2021 on the Coast Guard's culture and the need for accountability for misconduct. Throughout this period, the committee specifically asked the Coast Guard about sexual assaults at the Academy, investigative processes, and whether Coast Guard leaders had actively covered up failures within the service. Yet at no point did the Coast Guard provide us information about Operation Foul Anchor until CNN began reporting on it last year. Documents provided by the Coast Guard to the committee show that the Coast Guard leaders considered our investigation into the issues at the Academy in deciding whether to disclose the Operation Foul Anchor to Congress and still chose to hide the information. Admiral Schultz did not discuss it at our June 2021 hearing focused on the culture of the Coast Guard, nor did he raise it with me when we met privately on relevant topics. The Coast Guard's failure to disclose Operation Foul Anchor in the face of the committee's oversight can only be described as deliberate and deceitful. I recognize that the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General's investigation into the Coast Guard action is ongoing, but I want to be clear, I expect those responsible for orchestrating this cover-up to be held accountable. It's imperative that the Coast Guard restore trust with its workforce, Congress, and the public by changing the culture that allowed these events to occur and ensuring that they never happen again. The Coast Guard rebuilding trust with its workforce is all the more important because as we all are military branches, the Coast Guard is facing a workforce shortage. The Government Accountability Office reported last spring that Coast Guard was more than 4,000 members short and had missed recruiting targets over a number of years. The Coast Guard has taken actions to address this workforce shortage, including providing hiring bonuses to new recruits. More needs to be done. Today, I hope to learn how Congress can support Coast Guard recruitment and retention. Finally, the Coast Guard's physical assets, its fleet and shore infrastructure are aging and in need of replacement and repair. Despite the strategic importance of the Arctic region, the Coast Guard has only one heavy polar icebreaker and one medium icebreaker. Both are decades old, yet the rollout of new icebreakers is delayed. The Coast Guard also faces an enormous backlog of shore infrastructure improvements. In 2019, the Government Accountability Office reported it would take the Coast Guard 395 years to address its backlog of maintenance and construction projects absent increased funding. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, signed by President Biden in 2021, provided the Coast Guard with $429 million to address the backlog. But more is needed. While I applaud Coast Guard's practice of making do with its available resources, I also know that Congress can help. None of the issues I've discussed today, rebuilding trust, increasing the workforce, and updating an aging working fleet and infrastructure portfolio will be quickly or easily addressed. Solutions will require the full attention and commitment of leadership, buy-in from the Coast Guard workforce, and resources from Congress. I hope to hear from you today how the Coast Guard can meet the moment, address its challenges, and remain always ready. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you to the ranking member. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to have Admiral Fagan, the Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, testify before us today. I ask that our witness please rise and raise her right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. I would now like to formally introduce our witness. Admiral Linda Fagan assumed the duties as the 27th Commandant of the United States Coast Guard on June 1st, 2022. As Commandant, she oversees all global Coast Guard operations and 42,000 active duty, 7,000 reserve, and 8,700 civilian personnel, as well as the support of 21,000 Coast Guard auxiliary volunteers. Admiral Fagan previously served as the 32nd Vice Commandant and in several other critical roles within the service as a flag officer. In addition, Admiral Fagan has served on all 7 continents, from Antarctica to Africa, and in many ports along the way. Admiral Fagan, thank you for being here today. You are now recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your opening statement.
Thank you, and good morning to the many distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I ask that my written testimony be entered into the record. Before I begin, I would like to express our sincere condolences on the passing of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, a former member of this committee, a strong supporter of the Coast Guard, and our thoughts are with all those who loved and knew her. On behalf of the service, thank you for your enduring support for the Coast Guard, our workforce, and our families. We're especially grateful for the $12.9 billion in discretionary funding included in the House Appropriation Committee's June markup. I'm incredibly proud of our workforce, who are on the front lines every day, saving lives, protecting our ports and waterways, defending our nation, ensuring our economic prosperity. You need look no further than the recent response to the Baltimore Bridge collapse and the Lahaina wildfires to see our value and service to the American people. Around the globe, from the Middle East, where we're boarding ships and seizing Iranian-made weapons destined for Houthi rebels, from the Indo-Pacific, Arctic, and throughout the Western Hemisphere, we protect U.S. national security, promote responsible maritime governance, dismantle transnational criminal organizations, and uphold the rules-based international order. At home and abroad, our crews, the heart and soul of the Coast Guard, put their lives on the line every day to protect, defend, and save. We do this with courage, character, and humility. We're doing more than we've ever done, and more is being asked of us. But now our workforce is stretched thin, and we're doing less with less. Our needs across the service are at risk of outpacing our ability to operate in the exceptional ways that we do. The Coast Guard needs more, and I know we need your support. And it starts with my highest priority, modernizing our talent management system to recruit and retain the best and brightest. We've made difficult decisions to tailor some of our frontline operations due to the ongoing personnel shortfall. We're working hard to close the gap, and early indications are that our efforts are paying off and recruitment is trending up. And I ask for your support to continue to build on this momentum. We need to provide our workforce with the tools they need to be successful: modern ships, boats, and aircraft, and the infrastructure and systems to support them. We must address their basic personal needs: housing, childcare, healthcare, so our crews can stand the watch with total focus, knowing that their families are taken care of. We also need maintenance budgets that actually cover our maintenance needs. Our projected ship maintenance budget will cover half of the planned projects next year, with similar shortfalls in our infrastructure and aircraft accounts. This causes us to defer maintenance, which drives up unplanned costs and disrupts work and training schedules. Sidelines our cutters and aircraft, taking our crews away from operational missions where our nation needs us most. And as you know, we have been hard at work strengthening the services culture to ensure we are intolerant of any harmful behaviors. This is critical work. As I said earlier, our people are the heart and soul of the Coast Guard, and our core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty define and guide all that we do. Every member of our workforce deserves a Coast Guard culture where each person feels safe, valued, and empowered, and where they belong. A culture that is intolerant of the crime of sexual assault and any other harmful behaviors that undermine our mission and everything that we stand for. This is my expectation, and it is the standard that we will hold ourselves to. This is about having courage to hold ourselves to the highest standards through our core values every day, ensuring discipline and excellence in our actions in operation in all that we do, and we are committed to that work. Together, I'm confident we will build on our successes to meet the threats and challenges of the 21st century as we remain the world's best Coast Guard. Thank you. Semper Paratus.
Thank you, Admiral Fagan. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. Given the time constraints that we have, I would ask the members to keep their questioning to 5 minutes only. And I recognize myself for 5 minutes of question. Admiral Fagan, the Polar Security Cutter, the heavy icebreakers. Can you give us an update on what is going on with that? And we should have had our first cutter already in the water, and we haven't even started building it yet. What's going on?
Polar Security Cutter is a critical national security asset for the nation as we create the ability to operate and generate presence in our own exclusive economic zone, in our own waters. Polar Security Cutter contract has been delayed. We're working with the shipyard. The shipyard was sold and purchased by Bollinger. It is now Bollinger, Mississippi. We're working with that shipbuilder to finalize the detailed design, begin building the cutter in earnest. We've begun some module work. I owe the committee an update on what the timeline will be for actual construction of the cutter.
Admiral, can I cut you off? Did you say you're working on the final design? You're supposed to have a ship in the water and you're still working on a design?
We have a design. The design maturity is critical to keeping the reducing risk in onward schedule slippage and cost. So that work is—
How many years have you been designing this icebreaker?
We've been working with the yard in earnest for the past several years. The original—
What's several years? How many years have you been? It's supposed to be in the water now. You're 5 years behind, right?
We are absolutely behind.
So how many years have you been designing this cutter?
I'll have my staff come back to when we actually started that design work. We're very close to having the design maturity needed to begin to build and create certainty around cost and schedule.
With all due respect, Commandant, I've been on this committee 3 years. We've been hearing the same thing, that we're really close to design and finishing design. What is the problem? Why haven't you finished the design? You can't start building it until you have the design. What's the problem?
The original company that the bid was awarded to lost time and schedule. They did not have all of the engineers that they needed to begin to move that forward. COVID complicated that timeline. I'm confident in the shipbuilder that we have. I'm confident in where we are with regard to design maturity, and I'm confident we will begin building that ship before the end of the year, and look forward to providing more details to the committee.
So we can look forward to laying the keel before the end of December?
I don't have the exact keel laying date. I will come back to you with that, sir.
Well, this is an issue of national security. To be honest with you, to not even have the design done yet when you're supposed to have the ship in the water by now, that doesn't give us much confidence. Okay, so I'll move on. On your recruitment, we're 2,500 sailors short. Where are you on recruitment? You said you've made gains there. All right, what's the cause of the problem, and what are you going to do to make sure that we have enough personnel to run the Coast Guard?
We appreciate the ongoing support of the committee to help us meet our recruitment challenges, and over the past several years, that support has allowed us to bring on more recruiters, establish a talent acquisition profession. All of those investments are paying dividends. This year, at this point, we have met our reservation numbers. So we are, for the first time in nearly 9 years, on a trajectory to at least stop losing people at a greater rate than we're onboarding them. The talent that is coming to the service is exceptional. I meet the young people at Cape May. They are driven and know why they have joined the Coast Guard. We continue to make investments, going to young people where they are, to ensure they're aware of the opportunity that the Coast Guard presents and that they understand what our value proposition is.
Well, so you stopped the bleeding, right? You think you stopped the bleeding. And by that, I mean you were losing more people than you're getting into the Coast Guard. So you're stopping the bleeding, but you bled out a lot. So how many more additional personnel are you gonna need? How many are you short right now?
We're short approximately 2,300 right now, and as I said, well, we've stopped that. We need to continue to keep our foot on the accelerator, and we are doing that. Some of the additional investments that the service will benefit from is engagement and work around infrastructure at Cape May, which is our single source for training enlisted personnel to ensure that they have a first-class experience. We continue to work with the oversight committees to ensure
Thank
we've
you,
got
thank you,
all
ma'am. My time is up. I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Madam Commandant, one of the things that I think in the recruitment you could look at is if we did recruitment like we do the rest of our service academies, where members of Congress can make appointments to the Coast Guard, that might be a way of closing that gap, since the other service academies, they're doing a pretty good job at fulfilling that. For some of the newer members on the committee, as you know, the Coast Guard is the only service academy where we can't make nominations to. And when you look at where most of the people in the Coast Guard come from, they come from either the East Coast or the West Coast. So if you're in Texas or Oklahoma, or Mississippi, or these other places, we don't have as many people. So I'm just throwing that out as an option. So the other thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is the process that we included, that the ship had to be built by an American-owned company. Am I correct?
Yes.
So can you tell me how many shipbuilders that could build that ship that's American-owned?
Polar Security Cutter is a complex ship to build. We have a number of shipyards, particularly along the Gulf Coast of the United States. As the contract was bid, any yard that won that bid was going to need to make significant capital investments in their structure, and that yard, which is now Bollinger, Mississippi, has made those capital investments and are in a position to build the ship.
So did that slow the process down, saying it had to be built by an American company?
So I'll have my staff come back to look at, as we were making those, the bid and the contract award decisions, and give you clarity there. There's a limit to the National Defense Industrial Base. We compete with the Navy for shipyard building capacity and ship repair capacity. The nation needs all of the capacity we have and more to ensure a ready force, and it applies to us as one of the branches of the armed services.
So when was the last time the Coast Guard took receipt of an icebreaker?
The icebreakers that we are currently operating, the Coast Guard Cutter Polar Star was commissioned in 1976, and the medium icebreaker, Coast Guard Cutter Healy, was commissioned about 10 years after that. So it has been a number of years since we've commissioned a new icebreaker, heavy icebreaker, for operation in either the Antarctica or the Arctic.
So do you have any knowledge of how often a request was made to Congress to fund an icebreaker?
I don't have the specifics of the funding ask and then the appropriation journey that we've been on, but happy to work with your staff, because we have.
Yeah, I think it's important that if the Coast Guard made the request that we need money to either build or expand the fleet, and Congress didn't award the money, I mean, I think that would be significant for it. So we both have talked about Operation foul anchor. Are you comfortable with where that process is right now within the Coast Guard?
With regard to Operation Fouled Anchor, the legacy mishandling of sexual assaults at the Coast Guard Academy in the 80s and 90s, we continue to work with the congressionally directed IG investigation and will remain responsive. I respect the role of oversight. As we wait for the investigation to complete, we have begun action as a service. I initiated a 90-day accountability and transparency review. There were 33 directed actions. 18 of them have been completed. But more importantly, this is a journey that will continue. This is not a checklist that when it's done, we're done. This is how we will create culture intolerant of any kind of harmful behavior as a service. And I am excited about the progress we've made and welcome an opportunity to share more details.
Thank you. You're back.
Thank you, the ranking member. I now recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Ezel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, for being here today. My home state of Mississippi is a hub for shipbuilding in the United States. For decades, Ingalls Shipbuilding in Pascagoula has delivered vessels for the United States Coast Guard and the Navy. This includes 10 of the 11 planned national security cutters to the Coast Guard, and they are on track to deliver the final vessels in the next few years. Additionally, Bollinger, also in my district, is contracted by the Coast Guard to build the Polar Security Cutter, the first heavy icebreaker to be built in the United States in nearly 50 years. Despite these accomplishments, shipyards in my state are struggling to find an adequate workforce. While the shipyards are working on solutions, more needs to be done to ensure the long-term success of these shipyards and the local economy in Southeast Mississippi. Companies like Bollinger continue to hire and train workers at a rate that previous owners of the facility hadn't seen in over a decade. Admiral Fagan, how is the Coast Guard navigating these workforce challenges and supporting the shipyards?
We've talked just now about my own workforce challenges, and workforce is a challenge for all employers. We continue to work with the yards on the Gulf Coast who we have contracts with, whether it's Polar Security Cutter, Fast Response Cutters, the Offshore Patrol Cutter, and recognize that workforce and steady, reliable, predictable work for those yards becomes a critical way for them to create certainty for their workforce and continue to look to create that certainty and predictability so that workforce can be hired, trained, and employed. It's critical to our national security.
Thank you. I'm also encouraged by the recent trilateral agreement between the U.S., Canada, and Finland to place South Mississippi as the icebreaker capital of the world for our allies. The Navy has funding to invest in shipyards that help make capital improvements. These investments enhance shipyard operations and support improving the workforce, resulting in better products for the federal government, service members, and ultimately all Americans. We know smaller shipyards often contract with the Coast Guard. Do you think the Coast Guard would benefit from a similar investment fund?
Access to shipbuilding and ship repair capacity is critical to the Coast Guard's readiness and critical to our national security. Any opportunity to increase the resiliency of the national defense industrial base as it pertains to shipbuilding is overall a good strategy and would benefit not just the Coast Guard, but the nation.
Very good. Thank you. I'd like to move to something else here just for a minute about the shrimping and fishing industry in my district. These hard-working mariners and fishermen help feed the United States and contribute significantly to Southeast Mississippi economy. I continue to hear about the impact of illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing on these families. We must continue to fight the illegal dumping and enforce the UFLPA. We've seen these foreign countries, mainly the CCP, have no regard for our laws or our communities. With the growing threat to the IUU around the world, especially with China's more aggressive fishing fleet, do you agree more investments should be made to increase the FRC acquisitions?
Yeah, illegal fishing is a crime, and it's a crime that is committed around the globe. The best counter for illegal fishing is creating on-scene and on-water presence. So any investments that create extra capacity to counter that crime of illegal fishing is a benefit. The fast response cutters have been exceptional assets for us, not just in illegal fishing, but in many of the other missions and operations we conduct as a Coast Guard.
Very good. What legal authority does the Coast Guard have to bring these perpetrators of IUU fishing to justice?
We engage in countering illegal fishing literally around the world, and in some cases, we partner with ally and partner nations to allow them to exercise their own sovereignty and their own authorities in their own waters. With regard to IUU fishing in the Gulf of Mexico, we continue to engage to counter that activity and create opportunities for enforcement and consequences to breaking the law.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to invite you down to Bollinger Marine. You can see the progress that's being made down there. And I'd like to invite any member on this committee to come see what we're doing down there for the Coast Guard. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman from Mississippi. I may take you up on that. Votes have been called, and so the committee will stand in recess until after the end of this vote series.
No, I majored in architecture, international relations, government, international relations, and after college, went to work for the intelligence community for the government, and then I married a Marine, and there were no jobs for me in my you just gotta put yourself out there. I mean, it's so cool. Like, I think if she knew that they're getting too much to say hi, and she's a really pleasant person.
Okay.
Like, she's a really nice person. She's not a scary person at all. So, yeah, you just, just do some nice cheerleading. Just say, hi, Susie, I just want to let you know that, I take her, and I have a nice to meet you, and shake her hand, and fly her nice stockings, and let her know where we're at.
Okay. And hopefully it's like Halloween kind of girl.
Well, yeah, I mean, she probably hasn't done that yet. After you shake her hand, we kind of buddies her much more.
But yeah, I'm thinking about law school pretty heavily, but
Are you?
what kind of entry level like gateways into journalism like do you recommend? Like I'm sure it's a lot of like different things.
There's so many different things. So it's really neat because you are a senator in the media law. There's kind of a neat organization called Military Veterans in Journalism. And, their organization is designed to get veterans into the newsroom. But they have, their website is pretty good in terms of it should have some guidance in how to get into a career in journalism. A lot of people go into journalism for college. That's their college papers, right? Like the academic portion. Before they arrive. I started out as a small paper outside of military base. How a lot of people get their start. But
I guess applying to like smaller firms.
yeah, yeah. Internships, a lot of people do internships, they start there. But law school is amazing. My oldest son is a lawyer.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, like recently a lawyer or like?
Yeah, recently. He's not too old. He went to law school at William and Mary,
Okay.
here in Irving. And he started out thinking he wanted to do environmental law, which was kind of a neat thing. And I used to know an environmental lawyer who was in the Coast Guard. There's so many different fields in law that are really, really interesting.
That's what I find, like it's the technical expertise that I can use for pretty much anything.
Right. I mean, he has a military background, and lawyer to criminal and like defense for military people. I mean, there's so many opportunities.
Yeah, my mentor told me I'd be dangerous because like psychology and then Coast Guard law enforcement and then like CRS and like disrespected like.
I know. I mean, that's a really good background, like for a lot of things. I mean, the thing about law school is it's exposing you to like all sorts of different paths you can take that do really interesting.
So obviously, I feel like the job market is not really conducive for lawyers, it seems like. How's his experience kind of been?
So right after college, or right after law school, he got a job in family law,
Oh.
which he dealt with a lot of people who were getting divorces, and
Oh, that's the
like
thing.
they were all like the nastiest, like they were just nasty to each other, right? And he found when he tried to pay divorce lawyers, like helping get in the best like situations. So he sort of started specializing in child custody and that kind of thing. But ended up he's an attorney for the adoption area, but he handles the child welfare cases. So that's what basically he does that. He does elder law, he does all that sort of stuff, and also parking regulations. I don't know. He does things like and opioids. He's got an interesting portfolio. Yeah, you're right. So it's really interesting.
And I think probably has a lot of impact and fulfillment.
He loves it.
Stuff,
He really does. Like when he's able to like help one of he's got a lot of kids who have a lot of problems and getting them
Again, thank you, Admiral, for your graciousness on the development of the day. Are you ready, Mr. Magazzini? Mr. Magazzini, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Congressman Latrell and I have been waiting for this day for a long time, so.
And you get to
glad
witness
that
it.
you were
Tell
here
all
for
your
it.
friends that this is the future of Homeland right here.
Yeah. You're going to get us in trouble. Well, thank you again, and thank you, Admiral. Rhode Island, of course, has a long, rich history with the Coast Guard, which maintains an active presence in our state, conducting search and rescue missions, protecting our waters from environmental contamination and illegal fishing, among other important missions. And I'm very proud that as of 2022, 2 additional Coast Guard cutters, the Tahoma and the Campbell, now call Newport home, and we are very proud and grateful for that. One issue that we are having in Rhode Island as relates to the Coast Guard has to do with the availability of housing. I have heard from constituents, from Coast Guard service members, who are having a hard time finding housing in the region, and particularly in the Newport area, where they have to compete with like the vacation rental market and other factors. And I know that this is not an isolated experience. 41% of U.S. Coast Guard units are located either in remote areas without a lot of housing stock or in high vacation rental areas like in Newport. So can you talk about how the Coast Guard is managing the housing program and what we as members of Congress can do to help you in those efforts?
Thank you. Housing is obviously a challenge for the workforce as we transfer them every several years. And Newport is no exception to the challenge in finding housing. We work to exercise all of our authorities with regard to housing, and so approach it from a diversified standpoint. And where Congress can help is ensuring we've got adequate housing allowance reimbursement for the workforce so they can actually access the housing. We're working to exercise long-term leases to provide better predictability for people, and obviously rely on military bases and some of the public-private venture housing there. And I know all of those are leverages that we use both in Newport and across the country to support our personnel.
Thank you. And we've heard a little bit already about the staffing shortages, the personnel shortages that the Coast Guard is facing. One of the impacts of that has been the reduced service at the Castle Hill Station in Newport. And so I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of what the timeline might be to returning to a full level of operation there and what needs to happen in order to get that done.
Yeah, Station Castle Hill was one of the stations that we moved to scheduled mission only. It reflects the shortfall in non-rated and junior personnel that we're managing as a service. That shortfall is currently about 2,300 people. I shared earlier that we have gained ground on our recruiting challenges, and we, at this point in the year, have the number of reservations that we need to sort of stop the growth in losses. It is going to take us time to build back, and we will continue to keep our foot on the gas to ensure that we're recruiting any and all who want to serve this incredible organization, and look forward to working with you and this committee to ensure that we've got all of the right investments for recruiting so we can continue to grow.
Thank you. And of course, I think part of how we address recruitment is by making sure that the Coast Guard is seen as a place that is welcoming to everyone. You referenced the issues with sexual assault at the Academy in the 80s and 90s. Can you just talk a little bit about what protocols, what programs have been put in place to ensure that that culture remains in the past and is no longer present going forward?
We've made an incredible number of investments in the organization, and today are not the same organization that we were in the 80s and 90s. Sexual assault's a crime, it's investigated as a crime, and committed to ensuring that there's full accountability when a crime occurs. Work we're doing around service culture today, that we've moved out on aggressively, is to ensure that the culture is intolerant of any harm, whether it's the crime of sexual assault, hazing, bullying, retaliation. We've stepped into that work. I'm proud of the progress we're making and would welcome an opportunity to share with you in detail some of the investments we have made and additional investments we will need to ensure that we complete this journey.
Thank you, Admiral. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Admiral, can you give me kind of we don't have to go too far into the weeds on this, but your cyber infrastructure, your cyber effort, and how you're sharing that across the force, and what that looks like globally, and how the footprint is, and the expansiveness of the footprint when it comes to the cyberspace.
We've been making investments in our cyber workforce, it started with protecting our own cyber infrastructure and increasingly includes investments in expertise as it relates to the marine transportation system and ensuring that the system we rely on a nation for $5.4 trillion in economic benefit is hardened and safe in the cyber world. There was an executive order in February that clarified our role in response to a cyber incident, and we are in the process of writing a rulemaking to clarify standards for the industry that we regulate to ensure that they as well are cyber hardened. We sit in a great area of expertise between understanding the maritime sector and having cyber expertise.
You're definitely the subject matter expert. I would think creating cross-functional teams is a must. Engaging with other services in their cyber force. Is there information sharing going? Because this is the tricky part, and this is something that's kind of frustrating to the committee. And when we talk about cyber infrastructure, is it's very siloed. And I'm a Navy guy, so obviously Army hates me for some reason. But we don't. Information sharing seems to be kind of restricted. We're trying to thread the seams. Have you engaged with your counterparts in cyber?
We absolutely engage with our DoD counterparts. I have Coast Guard personnel at U.S. Cyber Command. I have a Coast Guard Cyber Command. We lean on that training and infrastructure. Our CPTs and mission teams work right alongside our DoD counterparts. We're a member of the intelligence community, and working to share information and break down those silos is an important part of the work that's ongoing.
Looking forward, and I ask leadership to look. You need to be looking 10 to 20 years ahead of where we are today. Is there advancements that you're? Let's see here. The best way to say this is there a stall point that you're seeing in the Coast Guard when it comes to cyber build out that the ask, the want? Because the committee itself understands the importance in the development of cybersecurity and what that does for our operational, strategic, and tactical advantages. Is there something that is kind of pinging hard on your radar?
We've been making these investments in cyber expertise. We've stood up a cyber rating, a cyber specialty within the organization.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, because I know recruiting across the board, minus the Marine Corps, I don't know if there's any Marines in here, good job. Recruiting seems to be difficult when it comes to our cyber specialists. Is there, when we talk about enhancing our recruiting capabilities, that seems to be one of those niches that we can't fill. Are you finding any success from last year till this year?
Cyber is definitely an area that young people are interested in. They want to join and serve in. And so it has been a benefit to have cyber specialty, cyber rating. I'd welcome an opportunity to work with the committee as we look at how do we continue to not just recruit, but then retain that workforce as we provide incredible expertise and training that we then need to retain, either as a Coast Guard or frankly in the military, to ensure our national security. And there's still a room to grow there, and would welcome further.
I do think that's a narrative we need to adjust. Actually, we need to recreate the narrative to recruitment in the military and how it's one of the most successful pathways you can possibly have as a young aspiring American. When, as far as our waterway footprint and the amount of immigration we see coming across the waters, and forgive me for lack of a better term, but Coast Guard is responsible for the policing of the global waterways. Is that overwhelming the system?
Is the question specifically related to maritime
is the
migration?
Is the draw to when we have the Cuban immigrants that are coming across the waterways, the Haitians that are coming across, it seems like we have to migrate a lot of effort into that particular spot. Are we losing effort elsewhere because we're having to focus in on that?
The Coast Guard views our maritime migration work, it is life-saving work as people make desperate attempts to illegally migrate to the country. 2 years ago, we're seeing large numbers of migrant flows across all of the maritime vectors, moved assets, created increased presence. More recently this year, those flows have been down significantly, which frees assets. We still have them postured in those vectors. We use unmanned systems as well as actual Coast Guard ships to create that presence, but we remain ever vigilant to preventing mass migration at sea, but balance that with our the other demands on our work to include counter-narcotics.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Breachin, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, thank you so much for being here. I really want to dovetail on my colleague from Texas, what he was asking about the amount of personnel and equipment, supplies, attention to the Caribbean area. It was, I took a Codell with a group. We had an incident with an Oklahoma and several people from the United States and one of the Caribbean islands recently. And it was astounding to find out as far out into the Caribbean area as Turks and Caicos that there was a patrol element and that we were spending so many resources in that area. What is the footprint, just, I guess, Turks and Caicos in the Puerto Rico area, what does that footprint look like in that Turks and Caicos region? And the reason why I'm asking this question, I am concerned that maybe we are providing services that I can tell you from meeting with the leaders of that country that I think probably is taken for granted. I can absolutely tell you that by meeting with their leadership, their governor, the AG. I don't think that they understand in terms of just how they benefit from the American taxpayer. Are we spending too much time and resources there where some of those assignments could be moved closer to the Florida area?
We have Coast Guard assets deployed into the maritime vectors where we historically see maritime migration to ensure that we prevent those illegal migrant attempts into the United States. You asked specifically about Puerto Rico. We have Coast Guard assets based in Puerto Rico, both fast response cutters and people at stations as well as an air station to create that presence that is critical to deterring those illegal effects. Much of the work we do, it's not just the Coast Guard, it's interagency work, and we do work with allies and partner nations as we look to mitigate and prevent illegal migration attempts.
But in regards to the amount of assignment that's that far away from the mainland, my question is, are we being as efficient as we could be? If I have a reason to play defense, there's a reason why you have post in the game of basketball, because you kind of concentrate manpower closer to where the goal is. For the goal for illegal immigration is get access to the mainland. My question is, are we sending so much personnel, equipment, time spent so far, thousands of miles off the mainland coast that your recruitment numbers are down, that maybe we'd be better spent focusing closer to our mainland?
Yeah, I'm happy to have staff come over and walk through the complexity of how we play, how we create that deterrent effect in going, providing a defense further from the shore than being in your own end zone is an effective strategy, and we have a multiple layered approach to doing that. The Coast Guard men and women that do this work, they understand the work, they enjoy the work, they take meaning and value from the work, and again, it is critical to our national security as we work to create Homeland security.
I want to switch topics in regards to the cutter and in terms of the contract. You have every expectation that what will happen is, with the design still being tweaked this late, and you've already awarded a contract. They turned in a bid. It was awarded by the government. They've already been establishing an increase in their spend to be able to have the capacity. I don't know what that would look like, if it's cranes, if it's footprint, if it's size, to be able to do something which, is a very limited scope specialty. But if your design is not complete, they're going to issue a massive change order. And then what wiggle room in negotiation does the federal government have to make sure that awarded contract that they just don't name the price, and we have the ability to say, wait a minute, that's way outside of bounds. I don't understand why the design, we have two in operation right now, and we're just wanting to add another one that's updated. Why is it taking so long to get the design that we know is going to be eaten financially up by change orders?
We have not built a polar security cutter or a heavy icebreaker as a nation for nearly 50 years. It'll be a big, complex ship. I am confident in the design and that when we field that ship, it will meet the needs of the nation. We've been working with the shipbuilder to get to the level of design you need to, when you begin to cut steel, that the ship is going to be delivered with a predictable schedule and predictable budget. I owe the committee an update on schedule and budget. We have been building modules that the shipyard has been learning from with regard to the complexity of welding and assembly, and those modules will eventually come forward into the ship that we're building. I'm confident in the builder that we have the contract with.
I yield.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Crane, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Fagan, thank you so much for coming today. I want to start by asking you to tell me about recruitment deficits that you've seen.
We began to have a deficit in recruiting several years ago, and it was exacerbated by COVID. We've seen the rebound from the COVID effect. I appreciate the support of the committee and our overseers who've allowed us to make investments back into recruiters. We've professionalized our talent acquisition specialists. All that has paid dividends. We have, as of 2 weeks ago, the number of reservations, so that means people who are planning to go through Cape May, that we need to consider a full successful year and meet our recruiting. The workforce we're recruiting is second to none. They know why they're joining and they understand the value proposition to the American public.
Why do you think you guys are failing to hit your numbers right now?
It was a combination of capacity, and we've reinvested in that capacity. We are not always understood by the totality of the American people, so beginning to increase awareness and understanding of who we are as a Coast Guard. And just as the shipyards are looking for workforce, we're competing with employers and other militaries, across the country for workforce. And young people have had some feelings with regard to work, and all of that has come together to make it a challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Admiral. What additional workload has been put on the Coast Guard and our sailors because we have a commander-in-chief who signaled to the rest of the entire world that we're about to throw our southern border wide open? And I know that you have to be careful in how you answer that. I'll make that claim because I know I'm able to watch cause and effect, and I'm not in your position. I don't wear your uniform, and that's not my chain of command. But with the policy changes of this federal government over the last couple of years, what additional workload has that put on your workforce, Admiral?
We view our role in preventing and interdicting migrants at sea as critical life-saving work, and we continue to ensure that we've got presence that's needed to prevent.
Ma'am, real quick, that's not what I asked you. I know that that's a part of what you guys have to do, and it does absorb resources. I'm asking you to give us an understanding of how much of an additional workload that's put on your resources, your infrastructure, your personnel because of the policy. Can you even give me a percentage?
Certainly happy to come over. We can walk you through all of the flows of migrants over the last several years. This year and today.
Has there been any study to calculate the additional man hours?
I can share with you the ebb and flow of man hours and resources that we've put into the migrant.
But you don't know it off the top of your head, Admiral?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't, because those resources also do other missions as we have them at sea. But happy to work with your staff and give you more specifics.
Thank you, Admiral. Admiral Fagan, how do you assess the current state of readiness and preparedness of the U.S. Coast Guard to operate and respond effectively in the Arctic region, especially coordinating with your naval counterparts?
We operate the nation's surface assets in the Arctic, And the Coast Guard cutter Healy, in fact, is operating in the high latitudes today, conducting science operations, creating presence for us as a nation. And we work and interoperate up there with other military services, other Arctic nations, military services, and create that on-scene presence in our own exclusive economic zone in the Arctic.
Admiral Fagan, what DEI program implementations have been made in the Coast Guard within the last couple of years?
We are hiring talent as a service, the best talent that's
I don't need the bullet point, ma'am. We all know that every institution within this federal government has now been plagued by this cancer of DEI. Instead of hiring people based on their merit alone, I'm asking you what programs have been implemented within the last couple of years that focus solely on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I'll have the staff give you, we value diversity, but the talent.
We've always valued diversity in this country, but we all know that we used to have a system that was more based on merit. I'm asking you specific questions about what specific programs have been implemented under your watch within the last couple of years that focus on DEI.
I'll have the staff work with your staff. I can't immediately say this program initiated in the last 2 years. Again, the programs all focus on ensuring workforce that meets the standards is able to serve honorably in the service, and that we hire a workforce that meets our standards.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentlemen's times. Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong.
Thank you, Chairman Jim Nez. Thank you for coming before the committee today, Admiral. I recognize and appreciate the growing deployment of the Coast Guard cutters to meet the threats around the world, and note our Coast Guard is spending additional time deployed away from the United States. This is especially true as the Coast Guard plays a key role in responding to China's actions in the South Sea throughout the Indo-Pacific. I do have some concerns, however, about the impact these deployments could have on our fleet. Admiral, what impact has the increased deployment tempo in the Indo-Pacific had on the cutter fleet?
We are globally deployed as a Coast Guard, and we conduct Coast Guard operations consistent with our authority. The work that we're doing in the Indo-Pacific is critical to countering China and to increasing other partners' capacity to enforce their own sovereignty and improve their own capacity and capability. The Pacific Support Tender Harriet Lane is a perfect example of how a Coast Guard ship with Coast Guard authorities can create capacity and opportunity for a partner nation.
What is the concept for conducting maintenance on forward operating cutters moving forward?
So we continue to look at how we support cutters forward. When the large cutters are over in theater, they're under the operational control of our DoD counterparts, and we rely on them for logistics supports. The fast response cutters have been fielded into the region. We've got several in Guam, and we continue to look at innovative ways to ensure we've got the right maintenance and support for cutters as they're forward deployed.
Thank you. What resources are currently available in the Indo-Pacific to the Coast Guard to conduct high-level scheduled and emergency maintenance to the fleet?
So, as I said, we rely heavily on the DoD services and investments that are over there. Primarily, the large cutters, we run them through their standard maintenance cycles, focused on shipyard availability, and continue to work to ensure that we're appropriately supporting the fast response cutters as they conduct operations in the theater. And a lot of that is in conversation with my DoD counterparts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, thank you for convening today's hearing. Thank you for coming here today. Though U.S. maritime ports were largely unaffected by last week's CrowdStrike outage, that event showed the swift and severe consequences of IT disruptions. Given the reliance of global supply on the efficient transportation of cargo through maritime ports, IT disruptions at ports, such as the Port of New York and New Jersey, would have a significant impact on the U.S. and world economy. It is imperative that we advance policies that will make our ports more resilient. In February 2024, the Coast Guard issued a notice proposing an update to its maritime security regulations by adding regulations specifically focused on establishing minimum cybersecurity requirements for U.S. flagged vessels and ports. Admiral, please explain why the Coast Guard believes such a rule change is necessary.
Cyber and cybersecurity is as critical to our infrastructure resiliency and readiness as hardware and infrastructure. We've invested in our own cyber force expertise, and now the intent of the rulemaking is to ensure that we've got the right clarity around standards for vessels and facilities. We issued a notice of proposed rulemaking, opened a comment period. That comment period is now closed. We've had over 400 comments. We're listening to what was said and are working to work that rule forward so that it creates increased resiliency around cyber in our critical maritime port infrastructure.
And can you summarize sort of what your, generally what the feedback has been from those roughly 400 or so comments?
Yeah, I have not seen the comments, but they focus on just ensuring that it sets the right standard and fair playing field for mitigating risk in cyber across realm. Happy to work with the staff on details, but obviously 400 comments, so it's going to take us some time to work through them.
Yeah, I'm sure just it's also harmonizing, right? Because there's so many different operators from so many different regions, under so many different regulatory regimes, and ensuring that they understand sort of what this rule would mean for them as they operate in sort of multiple jurisdictions. But we'd love to work with you. I was actually just in a cybersecurity meeting with our cybersecurity subcommittee chair, Andrew Garbarino. So something that we would love to partner with you, given our port infrastructure in the district and our work on the cybersecurity subcommittee. I want to turn to workforce. You mentioned that modernizing the talent management system, which has remained unchanged for 75 years, is a top priority. Like many of my colleagues, I'm concerned that the workforce shortage will prevent the Coast Guard from effectively responding to a major event like a natural disaster. Before I get to my question, I do want to mention that you have a terrific First District military aide, Melanie Arroyo, who's a proud product of Bayonne, New Jersey. She is an all-star, and I am proud that she's a member of the Coast Guard, so I just want to give her a shout out. The mayor of Bayonne is extremely proud of her. We all are. But if the Coast Guard is required to respond to a large-scale emergency today, would it have the staffing and resources it needs to do so while maintaining its various mission capabilities, or would it have to scale back missions or make other changes?
So our role in crisis leadership and disaster response is one of the core strengths of the Coast Guard. And we remain always ready to respond in time of need, whether it is a hurricane or look no further than the response to the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which showcases the flexibility and nimbleness that we bring as a maritime organization, a military, a law enforcement agency, and we continue to view that as critical work that we provide to the American public and ensure that we stay nimble and responsive should that need arise again, or I should say when that need arises again.
I appreciate that. On May 14, 2024, the House passed my bill HR 7702 as part of the Coast Guard Reauthorization Act of 2024. This legislation was introduced in response to the tragic vessel fire in Newark last July, which claimed the lives of two brave firefighters, August Augie Yakabau and Wayne Bear Bryant Jr., both Newark firefighters. To address the significant risk posed by vessel fires, what are the Coast Guard's current capabilities for coordinating with local firefighting units and other stakeholders to ensure effective response and prevention measures for vessel fires?
So our role in the ports and the communities is to bring all of the entities together, response entities and port facilities, to ensure that lines of authority and capabilities are well understood. That's done in New York through the Area Maritime Security Committee. And we continue to serve in a coordinating and a convening role to ensure that all entities with capacity and authority are able to talk to each other and understand before the response happens.
I appreciate that. I appreciate your work on all fronts, and thank you again for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman from New Jersey. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the start of the 118th Congress, our committee has been laser focused on securing our border and stopping the flow of illegal migration and illegal narcotics. The Coast Guard plays a significant role in DHS's posture on the maritime border. Most of us have seen videos on social media of Coast Guard boarding teams seizing drug boats and stopping boats overladen with migrants attempting to illegally enter the United States. We're thankful to the Coast Guard and the hard work that they do on behalf of the United States. Admiral Fagan, on average, how many illegal aliens does the Coast Guard interdict in a year?
The number of interdictions that we encounter at sea has varied significantly year to year. This year to date, the numbers have been quite low in comparison to previous years. Happy to have the staff come over and walk you through 3 to 5 years worth of maritime migration interdiction numbers. Creating on-water presence helps prevent that flow, and also policy clarity with regard to consequences for illegal attempts to migrate also have significant impact on whether the numbers are up or down. Weather gets a vote too.
Right, certainly understood. Thank you. We'd probably take you up on that offer. I would appreciate it. What countries are the most frequent countries where people are illegally trying to enter the United States?
I'll speak to the maritime migration flows. The typical nationalities encountered at sea are Haiti and Cuba. There are some onesie, twosies, and again, can walk through all that, but primarily at sea, it's Haiti and Haitians and Cubans.
On average, how many drug boats does the Coast Guard intercept every year? I know you may not have the number in front of you.
Our counter-narcotics mission work in the Eastern Pacific and in the Caribbean is critical. It, too, is life-saving work, preventing narcotics from reaching the streets of the United States and resulting in overdoses. And this is a line of effort that we work in conjunction with other allies and our DoD partners. And we continue to interdict primarily cocaine, but some marijuana as well at sea. That is work that Coast Guard members are doing right now as we sit in this hearing room. And again, can walk you through those annual reports and numbers. But it's critical life-saving and national security work we do on behalf of the nation.
Well, we thank the Coast Guard for that. On average, how many pounds of narcotics does the Coast Guard seize every year? That's pretty much what you just alluded to, cocaine, and mostly cocaine, you said?
The majority that we see at sea in the maritime flow is cocaine, but we are also seeing marijuana, and occasionally we'll find some fentanyl or methanol. Again, happy to walk you through all. It varies year to year, month to month.
Of the total migrant and drug boats that sail from Central and South America, or Cuba or Haiti, what percentage does the Coast Guard interdict with, and what percentage evades detection?
So when we detect a migrant venture, we work then to follow it and interdict at sea. The ability to detect particularly vessels that are not on the high seas can be a challenge. When we detect the vessel, we move to interdict. I don't have offhand what the estimate on number of interdictions versus number of getaways, but can work that. Again, life-saving work to ensure people don't lose their lives as they make these incredibly hazardous journeys at sea.
How many migrants do lose their lives? I would imagine there's some that don't make it.
Yeah, our goal is to prevent that loss of life, but there have been loss of life in the maritime flows, and again, we're happy to share what the estimates are, and that as well varies year to year.
Dangerous job for the Coast Guard as well. Has there been loss of life for members of the Coast Guard?
Yeah, we have been very fortunate that our members have not been killed but it is dangerous work. We continue to ensure we've got the right training and policy and procedures to mitigate that risk, but it is work that we happily do on behalf of the nation, and we'll continue to lean into, and I'm committed to ensuring my workforce has all the tools and training they need to do it safely.
Thank you, Admiral Fagan. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you very much. And Admiral, thank you for your service. We know your job is not an easy one, and we have the utmost respect for anyone who wears a uniform and protects our flanks. So God bless you, ma'am. As the climate changes, the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events are increasing. This summer, a prolonged and intense heat wave has impacted millions across our country. Hurricane Beryl, which recently hit the Caribbean and Texas, was the earliest ever Category 5 in Atlantic hurricane. This was fueled by the ocean being as warm in June as it is typically would be in September after months of summer sun. And we still have many weeks left of summer and months left of hurricane season. How has extreme weather fueled by climate change impacted the Coast Guard's operation?
We are obviously deployed or employed along the coastline, and so as weather events and flooding events intensify, it impacts our infrastructure. As we've rebuilt post-hurricanes in previous years, we moved to rebuild that infrastructure so it's resilient to those kinds of impacts from climate change. Our role as a first responder, disaster responder, leader in disaster, we continue to hone those skills, and I'm certain whether it was the Francis Scott Key Bridge or Beryl or the next disaster that Coast Guard people will be there and ready to lead and support the nation.
Can you speak to the precautions the Coast Guard has taken to protect its people and its physical assets in light of the increasingly hot summer and intense storms anticipated?
Yeah, we continue, as opportunity presents itself, to make investments in our infrastructure to make them more ready and more resilient to the impacts of both temperature and water events, and we'll continue to look for those opportunities to make those investments in the future.
How did the Coast Guard support Hurricane Beryl response efforts, and how well prepared, in your estimation, is the Coast Guard to respond to future events?
Yeah, the Coast Guard takes our role in responding to hurricanes quite seriously. We do a lot of work as the hurricane is approaching a coastal area to ensure that our ports and our harbors are resilient, that our own equipment and people are out of harm's way. And we posture to ensure that as the storm passes and we're able to begin moving primarily aviation assets and boats, that we're in a position to do critical life-saving work and then move to bring the alignment of federal, state, and local responders together to ensure that those communities' needs are being met and met in a way that's responsive to whatever the impacts of the storm was.
Has that been effective, ma'am, working with local and state GOSEPs and the like to make sure that the deployment of resources are timely dispatched and the assistance is met with the coordination that's required?
In our ports and communities, our captain of the ports, who are 06 captain level in each of the major ports in the country, they convene the other federal, state, and local responders. This happens in the good times, so that when an actual disaster or response has occurred, those people in the port, they know each other, they understand authorities and capabilities, and are able to come together much more quickly for alignment on response. The Francis Scott Key Bridge is a perfect example of how all that comes together for great benefit for both the local community and the nation.
As I often say, we know when these storms are coming. We know their names. They tend to come faster, stay longer, and come with greater intensity. God forbid that we don't learn from each storm to make sure that we are not doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Including the local communities is paramount in making sure in the pre, during, and post effects that the people are well informed of access and opportunities to stay safe. Real quickly, through U.S. maritime ports, though the U.S. maritime ports were largely unaffected by last week's CrowdStrike outage, the event showed the swift and severe consequences of IT disruptions, given the resilience of the global supply on the efficient transportation of cargo. How are we addressing those concerns?
We take our role in cyber as it pertains to the marine transportation system seriously. We've been investing in our own cyber expertise and cyber capacity. We're in the process of a notice of proposed rulemaking to clarify standards with regard to cyber readiness, cyber resiliency as it pertains to ships and facilities, and continue to work on ensuring we've got the most resilient marine transportation system that the nation needs.
Thank you, ma'am. My time has expired. As I opened, I'll close the same way. Ma'am, thank you for your service and all the men and women of the Coast Guard for the incredible work that you do. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
The chairman now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commandant, for being here. I want to follow up to my colleague from Arizona, his questions on DEI, because I'm also concerned with that. I think back to my time in the military where we had mandatory training, and some of that mandatory training I thought was appropriate as a Master Chief. Sometimes I thought it was busy work, parts of it was busy work, and then some of it I thought took us away from doing our job. So the question for you is, how many hours of mandatory DEI training do Coast Guardsmen have?
We have a number of mandated general military training requirements. I don't know of a standalone course. We'd have to look into each of those to understand, is there a D&I component? My focus on the service is hiring talent that meets the standards and then ensuring when a member has taken the oath and decided to serve, that they encounter an environment that's free from harm, that is intolerant of harm, and where everyone is valued and able to achieve their fullest potential.
I'd appreciate if we can get back with maybe a number of hours on that as you dig through it. Once again, I'm concerned that we're take away from our job, and your job is very important, it's very critical. And I'd also say DEI does not equal diversity in many cases, but I'll leave it there. I'd love to follow up with you on that part. Now to talk a little bit of tactical. Jihad of South. I'm a proponent of Jihad of South. I think it is the gold standard in many cases of bringing interagencies together and success. Outside of being on Homeland Security, I'm also on the Homeland Security Committee. I'm also on appropriations. So my question is very clear to you. Jihad of South plays a critical component to counter narcotics and maritime security. What additional resources, money, right? How much money do you need in order to have Coast Guard successes increase, specifically when talking about Jihad of South?
I agree. Jihad of South is absolutely the gold standard, and not just interagency alignment, but also international partner alignment as they do all of the detection and monitoring for the counter-narcotics effort. Specific to the U.S. Coast Guard and needs, it comes back to our major ship acquisition programs, ensuring that we've got reliable budget authority and appropriation for our acquisitions, particularly the offshore patrol cutter, which the first one was launched in the fall, but creating ship capacity that creates the force package that gives you endgame and JIADF is really where the sweet spot is for the Coast Guard.
Excellent, and I look forward to continuing to work together. I think one of the issues has always been the lack of platforms that Jihad of South has in order to operate. The mission always grew. There was always plenty of work. There was just not enough assets to go about because you were oftentimes competing with other areas. Once again, as put my appropriator hat on, if there's any way I can help in that, would love to work with your team, maybe more specifics outside of the overall umbrella, but more specifics in order to build that out. I'm very interested in that. My next question is on CrowdStrike. The CrowdStrike IT outage impacted the world, and on that day, the U.S. Coast Guard Southeast posted via X, the nationwide connectivity outage are impacting the U.S. Coast Guard Rescue 21 systems and hashtag D7. For urgent distress, please use VHF Radio 16 to reach out to the Coast Guard or dial the 7th District Command Center. Was this an isolated incident or was this Coast Guard wide?
So the CrowdStrike incident that we all tracked as a nation early on that day and Friday was not the cause of the Rescue 21 outage. Instead, it was a hardware failure on a Verizon system that we rely on for some of our network. We continue to work to troubleshoot that, understand it was a Coast Guard-wide impact to the Rescue 21, speaks to the need to ensure our own resiliency and our own IT infrastructure, and welcome further discussion to see where we might be able to make more investments.
To that point, I'd like to continue to work together on future situations where we can make this, we can prevent this from happening. My last question is on an article from Defense Scoop last year that highlighted Coast Guard petition for formal recognition to the U.S. Cyber Command's force. Given the Coast Guard's unique cyber positions and its dual role under the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Defense, how would this formal recognition within U.S. Cyber Mission Force enhance Coast Guard's cyber capabilities?
We've been investing in our cyber capabilities, both internal to the organization and the work we do in support of U.S. Cybercom and with U.S. Cybercom. Happy to have the staff come over. There's a number of classified elements to it, but walk you through all that is going on and how we contribute to the broader cyber fight in defense of the nation.
We covered a lot of ground in 5 minutes, but once again, this cyber issues that aren't going away. The Coast Guard is the tip of the spear in many cases, and I want to make sure that you have a partner not only in me, but also in this committee. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Tanadar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Admiral Fagan, for being here. And I thank the men and women of Coast Guard for their hard work. Operation Fault Anchor revealed a culture at the Coast Guard Academy that allowed abuse to persist and go unchecked. Senior cadets were given power over junior cadets that they misused, and cadets were rarely held to account. Allegations were downgraded and dismissed. The Academy insulated itself from the rest of the service by handling allegations internally and sealed records. According to the final report of investigation, victims did not receive respect consistent with Coast Guard's core values on several levels. These are the facts, Admiral Fagan. I would like to better understand the standards of character for cadets at the Coast Guard Academy as they are now. If a cadet was found severely liable for sexually abusing and defaming a woman, would that violate the Coast Guard's code of conduct?
The Foul Anchor investigation revealed to us inadequate handling and investigation of sexual assaults reported by cadets in the 80s and 90s at the Coast Guard Academy. One assault is one assault too many, and we are not the same organization today that we were then when we failed to create the appropriate environment for reports of sexual assault. The standard at the Coast Guard Academy is the same standard that we have in the service, and that is that we will not tolerate sexual assault, harassment, retaliation, retribution, hazing, bullying. Growing a culture that's fully intolerant of that change, where people have the courage to act, to report, and that there's trust in the system, is the work that we're doing.
Let me ask you, if 18 women accused a cadet of having a history of disgusting and at times criminal behavior towards women, including sexual harassment and sexual assault, would that cadet be allowed to serve?
Those reports today result in a full investigation. And when substantiated and misconduct is found, those cadets are not allowed to graduate.
All right. And if a cadet had a history of making public, vulgar, and profanity-laced remarks about women, so vulgar that I cannot read them here today, would that cadet be considered fit for service?
We would fully invest, with that report, we would fully investigate it and determine whether the behavior, and it does not sound like it's consistent with our core values, and hold that cadet accountable, the same as we would with any member of the service who is found to have conducted themselves inconsistently with our core values.
Would that cadet be considered fit for service?
No, but again, consistent with policy, program, and our core values. I won't tolerate misconduct. I don't tolerate criminal behavior. When it's reported and it comes to light and we're investigating it, we will move to ensure accountability, and that means, in some cases, removal from service, other cases, reduction in grade. We have a number of tools, and we will fully leverage those tools when somebody is found to have, one, crimes in the criminal system is been well invested in, but other misconduct as well must be addressed.
Thank you, Admiral Fagan. I believe these behaviors are unacceptable for all Coast Guard service members, from cadets to senior leaders, and in fact, for any leaders in this country. Do you agree?
I hold myself and the workforce to the highest standards of ethics and integrity. Our core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty guide us in all that we do, both on and off duty, and we must hold ourselves to the highest standards.
Thank you, Admiral. And I yield back.
I want to thank the witness for her valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for you, Admiral, and we would ask that you respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be open for 10 days. Okay. Ranking Member Thompson would like to make a closing statement.
Well, one of the things I didn't get a chance to say, Admiral, is let me thank the gold standard of the Coast Guard for being Johnny on the spot as first responders. I went through Katrina and a lot of other stuff, and I know Congressman Carter and others who, Congressman Ezell, who represents the Gulf of Mexico area, really appreciate it, and I've seen the work. The men and women do a stellar job as first responders. I mean, it's sort of like when they show up, you know the real help is there. So I want to just compliment you for doing that. Your mission is critical. Everybody here talks about putting resources where they need to be. I'd encourage you to go back and ask for more, whether it's in a supplemental that we expect in the not too distant future or something, and let's see if we can't get you where you need to be from a resource standpoint. So it's good. But also I need your commitment that once the Inspector General finishes his work, that you will take whatever action necessary to do it. It's a black eye on the Coast Guard that women who serve are being harassed and others, and we just can't have it. So it's been documented, and I encourage you to, once the work is complete, that your commitment is that we'll get it done, and I know you'll do that. But also, Mr. Chairman, last summer, this committee passed Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's cyber workforce bill, but it has not yet been considered on the floor. In the Congresswoman's honor, I urged the chairman to ensure that her bill is considered and passed this Congress. I think it would be a fitting tribute to her legacy on this committee. And I look forward to working with you to get it done. We didn't have any opposition to it, so it should go forward without any delay. And I look forward to to working with whomever to make that happen. With that, I yield back.
Without objection, this committee stands adjourned.